Kia ora koutou, ko aira te mauna, ko mata au te awa no menia tautau ahau, ko au te tahi tōku koinga noho, ko Phillipps tōku ingoa, ko David tōku ingoa whānau, ko David tōku ingoa, he kaia ko ahau I te kuro tuaroa o Waihora. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Wonderful to have you all here. Thank you for coming along and hearing my ponderings. What I really want to talk about today is the journey we've been having at Lincoln High School, which has been related to our reflections on NCA and on our students' needs and what we've been achieving. And I guess in a way, it's why I'm excited about the potential of NCA changes as we go along. So I'm just going to share my screen and try and get my slide going. And try and get my PowerPoint going, and that bar's in the way. So sorry about this. Well, I'm just going to have to reduce this a wee bit first because there's a big bar in the way. All right. So has everyone got that? We're online. So so this is just how we actually rethought what we were doing, and it's an important journey that we had. But before we actually get too far into it, here's a wee starter, and what I'd like you to do is just put your comments in chat to go with this one. Just what do you think in terms of this? How does this relate to teaching maths and stats? Just a few quick comments if anything pops up there. Mathematics is arts itself. Very good. Perspective and proportion. Yep, golden ratio, lots of things there. Rubbish. Cubism. Cool. All right, this is a statement I put up to my students at years ago, actually. And I just set it up there on the board. There's no place for maths and art. I just had it written on the whiteboard, and I greeted them as they came in. And they sort of came in and sort of got set up and chatted to each other, and eventually actually started looking at it. And they actually started arguing. All those who thought there's no maths, art's got nothing to do with maths, and all who thought about a whole lot. And it led to a whole lot of stuff that we looked at basically around geometry and as well, and patterns and things like that. So it was quite interesting. And obviously, if you've seen Escher, you know there's lots of maths and art. Okay, next one. Nope, if I got my slide back. All right, what about this? Where would you take this in the classroom? Edge comments. Statistics for insurance claims, yep. Any other thoughts? Yeah, focus for learning. For learning in what area though? Speed, distance, time. Yeah, you could actually look at more of the maths behind driving. Data analysis. Great. Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. But let's just carry on as we go. And I'll talk to you about the journey we've been having. So what's this all about? Prior to the introduction of NCA, one of the things that I realized is we had a bit more freedom. We used to do all sorts of really interesting things in our classes. And then along came NCA and it changed. Because for instance, before NCA, when I was teaching, I can remember that what's now considered excellence actually used to be our topic starters. And they were our rich problems to actually get people thinking and evoke thinking. NCA, what happened? Well, the scheme topics became smaller, assessment started to drive learning, and basically for us, rich learning began to wilt. And I want to point out, I'm not saying that it was the intent of NCA for any of that to happen. I think we allowed that to happen. We allowed our teaching and our thinking to be driven by assessment and the need to get credits. So that had a bit of impact on it. And so these were the things we sort of found, that it compartmentalized our teaching. It was all driven by standards. And some of you may be familiar with this quote from NCA Review, that constant assessment can leave little time to focus on rich learning, discourage innovation and risk-taking, or crowd out space to try new things. And I think that very much reflected where we were at. And we were getting really, really frustrated with that. So we decided to change. And after lots of reflection, a bit of lobbying going on from amongst various departments, we actually came up with the idea of, let's get rid of NCA level 1 to start with. Let's try and play a bit more. And so that's what we did. Now, here's some of the things we've talked about in doing it. The first thing is, what I think we forget is that NCQA never intended that level 1 was going to be something everyone did. All right, that was a comment they made. It was their backstop. The actual base entry level or base qualification is actually exit qualification is level 2. So NCA level 1 didn't have to occur, but we wanted it because we were a school, we were a country that had year 11 school certificate. So that's why everyone had it, because we thought the parents would revolt. Interesting, our parents haven't. So we know what's been going on. So at Lincoln, basically, no subject does NCA level 1. The only qualification we're focusing on at level 1 is numeracy and literacy. I'll put a caveat on that. Some are doing 1 standard just to give the kids the experience because it falls out of the learning. But actually, NCA level 1's not our focus. So suddenly, all that assessment-driven stuff is gone, and we now have the freedom to actually look at learning and focus on rich learning going on again. And that's a real bonus. Some of the other reasons behind it, by the way, is actually the mental health of our students. Here's a stat from New Zealand Ministry of Health a few years back. 1 in 5 young New Zealanders affected by depression, and I'm sure we've all experienced that in our schools multiple times. Youth suicides. We've unfortunately in a school that's had a lot of deaths, and some of it by suicide, some of it by stupid risks in cars and things like that, because their students are taking silly risks. And part of that's the pressure that they're facing. So this was one way of us thinking about that. Youth advisory group, swamping, concerns about the swamping and the effect that has on them, and the inhibition, the inhibitant that is on reaching their potential. And again, that one from the NCA review that came out. So it's not just our thinking, it's obviously coming out across because it was very dominant in the NCA review. So that's what we did. And then of course there was our student voice. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but in year 13, we surveyed our students because we noticed that they were dropping off. Partway through the year, they'd start dropping off. And the comment was they were just over it. They'd had enough assessment. They'd already had 2.5 years of assessment from year 11, 12, and 13, and they just couldn't be bothered anymore. And I think that's something just for us to remember. It has a big impact on them as they go along. We are one of the few countries in the world that have 3 years of high stakes assessment. Most others only have 2. So the question we asked ourselves is, why are we doing it? So what did we do? Well, the other thing that went with it is we decided to move to semesters. So our year 11s and our year 9s and 10s are all semesterization. Eventually we're going to do the same with 12 and 13 because that makes it easier to have cross level education as well. What does that mean? Well, it means our year 11 run 2 18-week semesters. And instead of doing 6 courses, they choose 12. Now, 2 of those courses must be maths-based and 2 English-based to meet the requirements there. But it means that instead of making our students narrow down really early, they're actually still able to get a bit of breadth and a bit of a taster. So they might choose to take 2 sciences, if you think about how it breaks, sciences break up, social sciences break up, they actually can get a taster of each one across those. And we think that's made a big difference for our students. They're certainly more positive about it. Although the negative side of that is some courses then have created, and we've done the same, heaps of different courses that now they have just sometimes too much choice. But it's a start, and it's made a big difference. It also has some other benefits. So as I said, variety of courses, because let's face it, at year 11, do they really know what they want to do in their future? We're getting less course hopping, because I don't know how you find it, but sometimes after a couple of weeks in a course, students tend to decide, I'm not going to face this all year, and they want to jump courses. And it creates all sorts of issues for deans and things like that. We don't get so much of that. And what's more, they realize with 18 weeks, if they don't like the teacher, then they'll just have to suck it up. It's only 18 weeks. It's not the whole year. And actually, sometimes I end up telling that to the teachers as well. So there's that side of it as well, that it actually makes life a wee bit easier. It's also got a lot more flexibility of timetabling for those of you who have to deal with placing staff. It makes a big difference. And means that we can actually have some rich learning and allow that better flow going on for year 12. And of course, 18 plus 18 is 36 weeks. So with our year 11s, they actually stay for 36 weeks because there's no externals. So when there's no externals, we get more teaching learning time. And that caused a shock initially, but actually the parents were very strongly in favour. So that's what we've done as a school. And let's just talk through how that looks for mathematics. So we started with 6 courses, we've narrowed it down to 5. It allows us to create some new courses and some model it. So that we've now got, if you think about this, these are 18-week courses where we can actually get more in depth with what we're doing and do a lot of exploration and a lot of rich learning. So I'm going to just talk through these courses and have a look at that. So the first one here that I've got is modeling mathematics using algebraic techniques. So this is basically our course for those heading on to calculus. And the reality is that I sometimes, we talk about the fact that there are a lot of students who struggle with algebraic thinking. They're not getting there with the algebraic thinking. They see algebra as very disjoint in terms of what they're doing. So this is a course that actually looks at, and you'll notice the word modeling appears in all our courses, is how we model algebra. And actually that is the basis of it, and the learning falls out of that modeling. So there is all sorts of technology available. There's all sorts of data out there for mathematical modeling that the students can play with and do all sorts of things with. And from that, the actual algebra can start exploring and investigating what's happening. They can see that different data looks differently and look at what is the functions that are behind that and just start playing. So that gets a lot more depth going. Now, I'm going to be upfront and honest. This works very well in some classes, not in others, and that's about teachers, because some still want to do drill and skill. And that's a battle that we're doing. But in those classes where it's not that, where it's actually is focusing on the modeling, the students actually have an excitement for algebra. And when they hit year 12 and year 13, we're seeing that starting to come through. It's actually, they're actually going, our year 13 calculus class this year is showing a lot of good, rich thinking from word go that we weren't seeing prior to that. Prior to that, we're seeing a lot of skills, but not the thinking around it. So we're hoping that's going to make a big difference to those students to be able to use it. So that's that one. So the next one that we're looking at is modeling using statistical inquiry. And this is the one we make them do leading up to, if they're going to go on and do statistics. We have a level 2 statistics course, and we have a level 2 calculus course. So this is one that I really love, because what we often do is we do part of statistics. We don't go through the whole PPDAC cycle, and students don't understand the statistics as a whole. So therefore, what comes out of is that our students are actually compartmentalizing parts of stats and not actually trying to get that big picture going. And we notice that when they try and actually relate back into in conclusions and things in year 12 and 13, and try and bring it all together and try and get that understanding happening. So what we do is we actually look at issues that pop up, because there are heaps of issues in the news. So this is a course that changes every year. We find the common issues, the things that are coming up that we think will engage them, and we actually start playing with it. So we will start with an article or a video. So that's where we go to that dash cam of teenage drivers getting distracted. We would play that. We would play that and we would look at the article that's related with it. And we would come up with a statement that challenged them. So that statement was, teenagers just shouldn't be driving. We should be raising the age. It's no good for them. You know, they get too distracted. They haven't got, there's some, within the article, there was things about their brains aren't developed enough to cope with it. All of those things that provoke outrage in the students. And interestingly, you get some students who agree, but you actually get them starting to think about it. And then once they've done that, we start looking at, okay, once we've had this debate, once we've looked at the article and seen the flaws in the article, so your statistical literacy is coming in there, we look at, well, how can we look at this process? Let's take the PPDAC cycle and say, how can we explore this issue? And so then we start looking at the whole idea of questionnaire design. And we start looking at how you actually get a really good questionnaire design, which does make life interesting when you consider the rubbish questionnaires that often are thrown around schools by various other subjects and teachers and things like that, because our kids are now very critical of everyone else. But it's really, really good because they actually now know how to develop a questionnaire, what makes good questions, how to develop who it's focused for, how to choose your sample, how to actually then gather that data in a sensible way and get useful data that you're going to be able to analyze, how to actually consider those other variables and look at all those sorts of things. So we're getting these deep rounded understandings, which when you think about the level 2 statistics standards and the level 3 statistics standards are helping them dramatically, because they're now looking deeper at the bigger picture around any of the statistics they're doing. And then we start looking at the different ways of analyzing, because when you do a survey, you get your categorical and your numerical data. So how do we use that stuff? How do we analyze different types of data in different ways? And it's actually meaning that they are coming out richer the whole way through when you focus on things like that. So we might do that with that initial topic, and we might even get them to choose another topic and play with it. It depends on the classes. So you've got that flexibility to look at where they're going. So we've also used things like the voting age, because there was that big push a couple of years ago to lower the voting age, because they were having low returns, and this happened here in Christchurch, very low returns in local body politics. So they thought if they lowered the age, they'd get higher returns. So that was a really interesting issue for students to debate. NCA, we talked about NCA. Is NCA working? Do we need 3 years of NCA? All of those things. So we came out with an article. There was an article about it just as all this review was starting to happen. There were lots of articles in the paper. So we looked at them. We got them looking at them. We put up some provocative statements to get them arguing and debating. And then they set up and explored it. Found a great article about lazy teenagers. There's so many articles out there about lazy teenagers. Teenagers these days are lazy. So we actually got that. I mean, the minute you say that, that really gets them going. So that worked. And then topical things like climate change. So there is so much out there, but you need the time to work it. You know, if you've got 18 weeks to play with things like this compared to what, 5 or 6 weeks and then assess, it's totally different. And so that's why we've found the rich learning's really coming out. And we've been doing this for a few years, a couple of years now. We're seeing the difference at year 12 and 13 as we do it. So that's that course. Then we've got a course. One of the things I'm sure you find it is that students are struggling. The problem with our current NCA is we're picking different standards left, right, and center. And unless you're running multiple programs or cross-curricular programs, it's really hard to meet the needs of all your students. So remember, our students take 2 courses, 18 weeks each time. So therefore, they can get the breadth, a bit more breadth that way. But this is one that we thought, how are we going to cater for all of our students who really just want to go into trades? I think too often our courses are focused solely on tertiary education, but there are students out there who just want to go into the trades. We've got a very diverse school, Lincoln High School. I perhaps should give you a bit of background on Lincoln. So Lincoln's on the outside of Christchurch. We have, we're a school at the moment of about 1,400. We used to be 1,600, but before they opened a new school because it was getting too crowded, and we were about to have an intake of 500 year 9s who we couldn't physically fit. So we've got, basically, it's just on the outskirts of Christchurch. It's about 10 minutes out of Christchurch. So we have Christchurch City students, we have the township students, the Lincoln University lecturers students, so academic parents. We have very well-off lifestyle blocks in our area, as well as farmers. And we do have our collection of the typical Canterbury redneck farm boys there. We have Burnham military kids who, you know, I mean, their lives are very interesting when their parents are overseas, in Afghanistan and things like that. And then we have people who come from sort of the deep, dark valleys of Banks Peninsula, which tends to be where they've got very different sorts of lifestyles, alternative sorts of lifestyles. So we have a diverse range of students, and we've got to try and meet the needs of all of those students. So this course was aimed at those who actually are practical, hands-on types of people. So it's actually looking at real-world applications of trig and measurement. And it's a hit. They love it. They love it because they can actually then incorporate with what they're doing in the workshop or in other aspects like that. So, you know, for these people, for these students, sorry, we're looking at what catches their attention. So one of the things we looked at was these. I don't know if anyone's seen tiny houses, but these are houses that often are built on trailers, large trailers, and just tiny houses that are camped in. Actually, in some of our areas in Banks Peninsula, you see some of these houses. So actually our students were fascinated by them. And so we started exploring them. It would have been nice if you could actually build them, but that's sort of outside of the school budget. But it was really fascinating as they looked at how can you optimize your space in a tiny place that's basically the size of a very large trailer and actually create a home that's going to work. And so they actually started looking at design and how to build, how these would be built and how you actually dealt with all the aspects that you need to deal with in here. And we looked at whether ones were fixed and therefore plumbing and electricity versus ones that were mobile. And it brought in all that measurement and trig and got them playing and coming up with ideas. And some of the conversations they were having back at home were really, really interesting because we got some good response from parents. So that's just one type of project. But again, you can find all sorts of projects, and it's about the interests of your students and working with that. And then they start seeing the need for things. Because I can always remember, you know, I'm sure you've experienced it, where you've met students afterwards, after they've left school and gone into things like trades, who were disengaged and who suddenly realize, well, if I'd realized I'd needed trigonometry that much, I would have done it. I would have focused more, because they're doing things in trades where they are using it all the time. And so I've got someone who's doing boiler making. He's just finished his boiler making course at ARA, who I met the other day, and he said that very thing to me as well. I've heard it lots of times. And so we're trying to let them see, because we've got time and we haven't been driven by having to hit these NCA topics and a requirement of this many credits, because I think schools sometimes put too many credits on our students. We've got time to play and to explore and to find their interests and show them how maths actually really works in it. So that's a real bonus for us as we go along with that. Why is there maths within art? We found also the other ones who were switching off were our creative students. So why not create a course for them? So this is a course that looks at all sorts of things. It's design, sculpture, art, product design, logos, packaging, all sorts of things where they actually get to be creative. And suddenly we're hitting those students who we have missed before, who actually used to sit and draw as opposed to do their maths. And they're actually starting to see a reason for the mathematics that they're learning. And that makes a huge difference as well, because they actually, they feel there's a reason, there's a point for being there. And I think too often we've switched those students off before. And then, you know, we've got to appreciate the creative students and what they bring, because that's important. But actually there is a place for them in mathematics, and they need to, it lets us see that. So, and as I said, this was one of the provocative statements we used to actually get them going and get them thinking as they work along. So that's 4 of our courses. The 5th one is actually another stats one. And this one we decided to look at because we decided to focus on some of those other aspects of statistics that we weren't hitting with the first course. And it's about the design. It's about designing experiments, designing simulations, designing different investigations, because there is some good standards there that often we don't use in schools. And of course, we don't want to do the standards, but the learning that's in them is really valuable. And I think that's one of the things that frustrated me, is that we ended up having so many standards, and that was because the community, the school communities, the maths community demanded all those standards. That's why we had 13, 14 standards. But we lost a lot of that learning because we couldn't teach them all. So this allowed us to be able to play with a whole lot and bring a whole lot together. So this is where we actually focus on the design, get that understanding of, if I want to do a simulation, if I want to simulate a situation that's there, how do I actually make sure my simulation's focusing on the thing I want and not other things? That's the whole point of the simulation level 2 standard. If I'm wanting to look at relational situations, how do I make sure, or experiments, how do I make sure it's the treatment or the variable that I'm using as my explanatory variable that is the only thing affecting the other one? Because I don't know if how many of you have taught bivariate in level 3. One of the things the students really struggle with is understanding that what other variables are influencing, and that there is often lots of other things going on in the background. You can't just trust your data because your graph says there's a strong relationship. And for some students, that's difficult. So this is about trying to overcome that sort of thing. And it's actually turned out to be quite a popular course in the end, because we get to play. And I don't know how many of you have come across the Census at School activity, which is Caribbean Fishermen. Interestingly, I think they use this in commerce as well. So the Caribbean Fishermen activity is actually one of the things we just do at the start, because for them, it's a game. The Caribbean Fisherman is trying to simulate what it's like to live in a third world country and actually try and make a living. And it's actually really fascinating. And I didn't know how the students would take this, but actually they are loving it. So basically, this is how we start this particular course. We just play. We have this situation where we give them the story. They're a fisherman on this tiny Caribbean island. And we talk about what are the things that are going to affect your lives, affect your income, because the only way you can make money is by being a fisherman and selling it to the one tourist town on the other side of the island. And we talk about what would affect it. And that's where we actually start thinking about the weather. And so you have this idea about the weather, but even if you have the weather in a simulation, what I like about the simulation is it recognizes that weather changes, that you have runs of bad weather. It's not just a one-off one day. So it actually deals with that. And we've tweaked the simulation as we've gone a wee bit, but it says if you've had initially, here's the probability of a good or bad day, but if a bad day occurs, you're more likely to get a bad day again. And playing with things like that and getting them to look at that and looking at severe weather does occur. How do you deal with that? And what's the impact of that? So we actually play this game where the fishermen on their little boats, they go out, they place their 6 pots inshore or offshore. Inshore is a little bay just off the island, and it's fairly protected. So they get, even on a bad day, they're going to get their pots full of shellfish. But they don't get as much money because inshore is smaller shellfish. The good shellfish is offshore, but on a bad day, actually, you don't get anything. And you've got to do that gamble because life's a gamble. You know, there's decisions you have to make sometimes, particularly in the sorts of places like third world countries. So the whole thing, we just play it. So we set up a spreadsheet, we set up day one, they decide how many pots inshore and offshore. We roll the dice then for the weather. If it's a bad day, they figure out how much money they've made. They figure out what, if a bad day, they've lost their pots. If they're offshore, so how much have they lost? What's their profit and how it works? And we keep going like that right through the week, 6 days a week out fishing. And then at the end of the week, they actually have to pay for their weekly expenses. And so it's about whether they can actually make enough money to pay for the expenses for their family, to run their boat, to do everything like that. And look at those living costs. And you play that for a while, but then you say, well, hold on, what else can happen? So here's my question to you. What other things do you think? I mean, normally in a workshop, I'd play this game, but we don't have time for that today. Just a quick question in chat then. These are the things currently, they start the game. We talk about the weather, what sort of day it is, what return you get on your fish or shellfish as a result, cost of pots, if your boats get damaged in a storm, cost of replacement, and then your living expenses. Any thoughts on what else? I'm going to open chat up again, look at chat again. Any thoughts on what else you could actually bring in for this? What curveballs could you throw in for these students? Unexpected health issues, definitely. All right. And that's very big right now. What else could you throw in? What else do you think could affect the income of these people? Crime, yeah. Vandalism to your boats, damage to equipment. Importing of fish, taking over, shellfish coming elsewhere. Markets changing, big one, markets changing. Competition from other fishermen. Yep, government policy. See, there's lots, isn't there? Yeah, kids, family, thank you for those people who've contributed there. There is lots that could happen. And I think sometimes we see the world in things we do, we look at a narrow aspect of the world. So what we do is we play this for several months. And we come up with all sorts of ideas that suddenly pop in. And that's why the kids love this, because suddenly there's new rules that are thrown on them. For instance, if I can get back onto this, when we look at it, living costs can change. So sometimes we up the living costs. Demand for shellfish, because remember, these are ones that are feeding the tourist town across the other side of the island. So off season, the demand's low. When the demand's low, your prices drop. When demand's high, your prices go up. You've got a cruise ship coming in, suddenly your prices will go up. So that has an effect. Competition expansion. So what actually happens if they get over a certain amount, we let them buy a second boat, and suddenly they've got a second boat running. So they've got more occurring, more money coming in. All right. Bankruptcy happens. If they get below a certain amount that they can't pay their expenses, they become bankrupt. And it's actually letting kids see all sorts of really, really interesting things that do actually affect it. And then what happens is after the 2 months that we do it, or 3 months, sorry, that they go for, and gradually all these things are introduced, they think, oh yeah, we've got okay. Then we bring in this tax, because they have to pay their quarterly tax, 10% of their earnings. And they suddenly realize that actually if they made a loss, they don't get given the 10% of the loss. Tax isn't about that. And it's just letting them explore what other things. This is a good way for them to realize that simulations aren't perfect. There are lots of other things going on. And when they're looking at data, they should be considering other stuff. So that's sort of things we're looking at. We've gone from having NCA and level 1 driving us to being able to play, challenge, and be more provocative. And it's making a difference. The thinking we're getting out of our students is deeper. We've got richer learning going on. So that's been our experience. And I mean, it hasn't been easy initially. We've had to put together ideas, and some ideas haven't worked, other ideas have. So, but we're making progress with our students, and we're already noticing it as they head into year 13. So I guess the reason I bring this in is because we're going to 4 rich standards in NCA. Here's my question to you. Could we do something different? Because this is what it's evoking for us to do something different. And maybe that's what we should look at. We've been doing that. We're not going to go back to level 1 because we don't see, as I said, the point for it. But I'm hoping that this philosophy, I'm looking forward to see what happens in level 2 and level 3, to see how the rich learning we're doing now can be transferred to level 2 and level 3. So that there is all sorts of potential that's out there. And when you think of, we can go where we want because our themes change. But when I think of local curriculum coming in, and I've been thinking about our work that we've been doing currently with Te Pāo Moki and the Taumutu Ruranga, they are just our local marae, and they actually are the custodians of Waihora, Lake Ellesmere, which is what our school's named after. And Waihora, if anyone knows anything about it, is a saltwater lake. It's basically on the edge of the sea, and there's a bar that blocks the sea from it, but they open that every now and then to let the water in and out, especially for the migration of various animals, various seafood, fish and things. It became a dead lake, and over years ago it was a dead lake. It actually, the mouth had got closed up, the native seafood were dying, sea species were dying. The eels and everything, we were having issues. They lost a lot of the native plants, fauna around the area, and the Taumutu Ruranga is actually been working really, really hard as custodians and working with the Environment Canterbury and the council to actually restore it. And they're making huge inroads, but there's so much there in terms of mathematical modeling and statistical modeling in what they're doing. And so that's where we're going next. That's what we're wanting to play with. But the reality is, with these standards, there is so much opportunity. And the question is whether we go with that. And I'm just conscious of time. So I'm going to just come out of that and just see if there are any questions. By the way, this is based on what we're doing. This was shared with us or gifted to us as a department from our mātua. Hapaitia te aratika pumau ai te rangateretanga mō ngā uri whakatipu, foster the pathway of knowledge to strength, independence and growth for future generations. So that's our whakatauki that we're now using that's been gifted to us. So that's our experience. And I just wanted to share that with you and just challenge you to think about, as we go to these new standards, is there a new way to move forward? And Pip and Rachel, I'm conscious I'm at the end of the time there and you need to deal with stuff.
No, it's all good. We've got a little bit of time. We've got a couple of questions that came up earlier. So one was about, is numeracy a maths only or other subjects? And related was another question on how do you assess numeracy? So I'll give you that question first.
Yeah, so the numeracy is that obviously other subjects are doing, we are doing the odd standard, and if it falls out of the learning, we're doing those odd standards. So we do have enough just to get the numeracy. And I think science is also doing the numeracy standard there. We've just been hanging out. Oh, if students are identified at risk, there's an intervention program that goes on that looks at numeracy unit standards in the background as they go. But we're actually just hanging out for the new numeracy to come in because we knew that was going to be happening. So at the moment we are covering that off, yes, by actually just doing standards as it goes, if they fall into what we're doing, and having an intervention program if needed, which is either using those unit standards or putting them through, say, number as a separate aside, as opposed to the whole maths focus for that. Cool. So fair question.
I think you've probably answered this one. How are you preparing for the new NCA standards? Will this change what you do?
I'm hoping it won't. I'm hoping it won't, but then we've got to, in terms of level 1, it won't change us what we're doing at all, except for the fact that we don't have to worry about numeracy, hopefully, other than support for those who don't get it in year 10, 9 or 10. Level 2 and 3, we'll wait to see what standards look like, basically, but I'm hoping that it shouldn't, because if we're down to 4 standards, surely a lot of rich learning can carry on. So we're actually looking forward to tweaking what we're doing at year 12 and 13 to get that richness there, as well as meeting the needs, of course, for year 13 for tertiary education as they move forward.
Okay, I have a couple of questions myself, and then there's a couple more come up in the chat. So the courses that you offer, the 5 courses, are they available both in semester 1 and semester 2?
It's basically at the end of the previous year, students choose their courses, and they not in a semester. They just choose, here are the courses I want to do, and then the timetabling places it where there's, and of course there are multiple classes. Basically every year we have had them in both semesters purely by demand. So that's always worked, but the student choice drives our timetable first, not the lines being set first.
And do students take more than 2 maths courses?
At the moment we have said no. We've said no because one of the philosophies behind what's going on is to give, you know, they've got they get more, they've got 12 courses over a year now, to give them more breadth. And if you know, other subjects might only have students taking it for 1 semester, we're getting at least them taking 2 courses for maths and 2 for English. So in fairness to other courses, we're saying no.
And so there's another question that's popped up. So how does this look in year 9 and 10?
How does it look in year 9 and 10? Well, basically, this is trying to build on from year 9 and 10. So year 9 and 10 is, we've redesigned our courses. All of this redesigning has been going on together. So year 9 and 10 is about trying to get that rich learning going there as well, to find out what they do know when they arrive to us and develop that further. But we're trying to keep the focus on rich learning. We've been always doing rich learning in year 9 and 10 because we could. It's just that we let NCA change that in year 11, and we shouldn't have.
Do all these courses permit students to progress to level 2 maths?
Yep, all of them have a pathway to level 2, and we have open entry to level 2 anyway. But as you saw, the MAL, the algebra modeling, the modeling mathematics one is a direct link to calculus. It's the one we recommend those who want to go down the calculus path to. We have in year 12 and 13 a statistics course, a calculus course, and a mathematics course, a mixture. So they do allow access all the way through to those courses. And again, when the new standards come out, I'm hoping they'll be in a way that we can frame it even more and align them better to what we've got.
How do you show progress? How do you record and improve student achievement aside from unit standards? And also, do you do any cross-curricular stuff?
Sorry, say that one again.
How do you show progress?
How do
you record and improve student achievement aside from unit standards?
Okay, so what we've been doing in year 9 and 10 is we look at what curriculum level they've been working at. We look at, and we do it on a basis of the solo taxonomy, so which actually aligns with NCA anyway. So we give grades like they're working at, on the particular bit they're working at 5U, and so that's 5 unistructural or multi-structural or extended abstract or relational, and our parents have been used to that from year 9. So so level 5, 6, 7, wherever they happen to be with that. And some of this work we're doing is actually curriculum level 7. So we report based on solo taxonomy and curriculum level. Okay,
do you do any cross-curricular stuff?
No, we don't. We don't because of the fact that the school's not ready for that yet. So that's where we have the problem there. Sorry, my screen's just done something funny. Am I still there?
Well, you're still there in terms of talking.
Yeah, my screen's just done something really weird, but that's okay. So yeah, we do actually, I've got that. We actually do, where was I? Yeah, the rest of the school's not, I think, at the point of cross-curricular. And that's the issue that I have right now, to be quite honest, because I think there's a chance for it, but and we're trying to talk with people so that happens, but it's just not going at the moment. Sorry, I'm trying to get everything working again for you. But, so yeah, it's a thing for the future. Yeah, I'm back. It's a thing for the future.
Okay. All right. Well, there are a couple more questions, but maybe people can just direct those directly to Dave. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually call it to a halt because we've got 10 minutes to go till our next session, and I really like to give people a chance to go and have a break. So I just want to, on behalf of everyone that's here, just thank Dave very much for the time that he has put into preparing the presentation and thinking about what would be really useful for us in any conversations we may be currently having in our own schools in terms of thinking about how we might look at mathematics and statistics teaching and learning in a different way.